Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Here is Stan Brooks to describe the slum town where the riots erupted.
The riots that shook Los Angeles swept over a 50-square-mile area known as the Black Channel, but the nation's horror centered on a place called Watts, the poorest of all the Negro slums in this lush land of make-believe. At first glance, you're impressed by the wide streets, the palm trees that jut high in the sky, and the rows of neat bungalows smothered with heavy foliage. But when you take a closer look, as I did, you cannot escape the misery that hangs over Watts, like the smog hangs over Los Angeles. Harlem with palm trees is the way sociologist Alex Rosen of NYU describes it. But, he goes on, it really looks more like Tobacco Road. And most of the people I spoke with, the people who, unlike most of the city, have actually been to Watts and have seen the poverty, agree.
The structures may not appear to have the same dilapidated appearance as in other major cities, but the same conditions exist.
The area doesn't look like a slum. It doesn't look like the typical eastern slum, at least. It looks much better, and small houses, private dwellings, and it's not comparable to some of the slums that we see in the east. Yet they really are not that much different.
Instead of having them up and concentrated in a small area, we've got them spread all over Hell's Half Acre.
Hell's Half Acre, the words of Police Chief William Parker. And Watts is indeed Hell's Half Acre, a black ghetto locked in, ironically, by the freeways that speed traffic across the sprawling City of Angels. The crime rate is double the rest of the cities. Unemployment is high and still climbing, with 1 out of every 3 or 4 out of work. It's a land of broken homes and broken dreams. Yet each month, 1,000 or more Negroes come up from the South, seeking the land of milk and honey. Few find it. And so this port of entry, this staging area, turns into a trap, a way station to nowhere, where hate and hopelessness fester.
The Negro middle class forgot about Watts. The white community hardly ever knew it existed.
We have at one end of the spectrum success and opportunities begging for people. And you have at the other people who are piling into this town who bring with them no skills, bitter memories, and who on the whole, I suspect, are not even retrainable.
And so the festering process begins. And finally, if there are no escape valves developed, we have an explosion, the gigantic expression of hopelessness, of fury, of anxiety, of hate on the parts of people who just saw no other way of expressing themselves.
This is Watts, forlorn, forgotten, festering. This is Stan Brooks.
You have heard the first of a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Here, Alex Rosen, Dean of the New York University School of Social Work, describes the atmosphere in Watts before the riots.
On August 11th, the Negroes of a community known as Watts in Los Angeles erupted in riot, leaving 35 dead, hundreds wounded and injured, 4,000 jailed, of whom 500 were teenagers, and millions of dollars in damages. What were the conditions of these people? 90% of Los Angeles' 500,000 Negroes live in the Watts ghetto. Few are native Californians, as most have emigrated from the South since World War II. Most of the adults have less than a high school education and are unskilled. 1 child in 3 comes from a broken home, where there's usually no father, and a school dropout rate for these children is twice that for white children. 1 family in 4 subsists on incomes below the poverty line. Perhaps most significant in understanding the causation of this riot is the hopelessness and despair involved in the unemployment rate, which is between 25 and 30%. The significance of this statistic becomes clear when we compare it with the unemployment rate in the depths of the worst depression our country ever had in the 1930s, when the unemployment rate was only 25%. Economically, therefore, the Negro community in the Watts area of Los Angeles has been going through a depression more severe than any in American history. Those who do work are menials, porters, janitors, maids, unskilled. This is a community as well of overcrowded schools with overworked teachers and unprepared and unmotivated children. One may ask several questions about communities like Watts. For instance, how does a mother keep her teenage son off the streets if he is a school dropout, unskilled and with little realistic prospect for employment? How maintain family cohesion when the entire family must eat, sleep, and live in a single room or in rooms shared with other families, as we saw them in Watts when we visited and studied the community? How maintain hope and confidence in a community where one sees so much despair and failure? And how maintain respect for law enforcement when the police harass Negroes and treat them in an insulting manner almost as a matter of course? The total situation here has produced a Negro community in which people can live out their lives without any meaningful contact on an equal status basis with white people. We have learned in our research that friendship and mutual understanding cannot develop in the absence of this kind of contact. These explosive passions we have just witnessed has shocked the American citizenry into an awareness of this infected pocket of misery, unemployment, and despair that prevailed in Watts in Los Angeles. This despair and disappointment of the Negro in the American dream was perhaps best expressed by a bitter Negro teenager who said, "This is a land of milk and honey, but only if you got the blue eyes."
You have just heard Alex Rosen, Dean of New York University School of Social Work, in another chapter in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Here, Dr. Bergen Evans, professor of English at Northwestern University, asks the question, what is a slum?
The Watts area of Los Angeles in which the rioting took place was, especially at first in news reports, referred to as a slum. But Eastern reporters, arriving on the scene with preconceived ideas about slums, were struck by how unlike Harlem, or Chicago's South Side, the area was. There were wide streets, small lawns, and many not unattractive houses. They knew there was much unemployment, and many people were on relief, but the place didn't seem what they had expected a slum to seem like. Well, no one knows exactly what a slum is. The word itself is a mystery word that rose out of the underworld in the early 19th century and then meant a room, usually a small dingy room such as a member of the underworld would use. This has led some to assume that the word is a shortening of slumber, but there is no proof of this. At any rate, it soon came to mean a collection of mean, squalid rooms, and then any area composed of such habitations, and that's what it still means. So the question shifts to what is meanness and squalor? That, perhaps, half the human race at this moment might regard the Watts area as a desirable place to live and envy it its lootable stores, would still not prevent its being a slum. There is a squalor of the spirit as well as of the body, a dreary hopelessness, a numbness of slow frustration, and a depressing sense of irrevocable exclusion from even a chance at the good life that would make a neighborhood a slum, even though the streets were wide and the sunshine bright. In the first slums, the dreadful warrens of the great English cities in the early years of the Industrial Revolution, gin, tuberculosis, and evangelical Christianity afforded a number of safety valves. But the people of Watts apparently want something else. They have a place in the actual sun. They want a place in the metaphorical sun. Man cannot live by bread alone, even if it's handed to him free from farm surpluses. We may simply have to revise and enlarge the meaning of the word slum.
You've just heard Dr. Bergen Evans in another chapter in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Here is how some of the people in Watts view the arrest that triggered the riots.
The bomb was here with the fuse. That the match that lit that fuse was this unfortunate incident which involved another police agency in arresting two Negro young men.
The young men referred to by Los Angeles Police Chief William Parker were two brothers named Fry, who later pleaded guilty. But the Holocaust their arrest set off was not so easily settled. This is Group W reporter Walter McGraw. Question: why did a simple drunken driving arrest set off a riot? One answer from Mayor Sam Yorty.
We've taken great precautions to prevent any incident between the police and the Negroes that might set off a riot. But into this climate came some state highway patrol officers who followed a suspected drunk or reckless driver into the area, and they evidently had not received the same kind of instruction as our police, because we've handled incidents in the Negro community, hundreds and hundreds of them, without ever setting off a riot. But these officers came in without proper instruction and did things that our police department would not do, conducting a long sobriety test out in the open with a mob forming. If we have to arrest a Negro in that tense area, we arrest him and put him in the car and take him away from there.
Was the spark that set off the Los Angeles violence just an accident or just the result of inept handling? Talking to Group W reporter George Barber, Wesley R. Brazier, executive director of the Urban League, saw the episode in a more sinister light.
It was well planned, and the alleged police brutality was not by accident, it was by design. A Negro stopped the state highway patrolman and informed him of a Negro driving in an erratic manner and that he was drunk. Now, the officer pursued this individual, and it was then that the mother came out and was reprimanding her son until a larger crowd grew up, and then she started lambasting the police.
The result of an accident, ineptitude, or a plot. The result was the same, according to Chief Parker.
This was actually the match that lit the fuse that loaded the potential bomb.
Perhaps the official investigation of the riot will clear up the mystery of its origins, but on the night of Wednesday, August 11th, a hot night in Los Angeles, nobody was in the mood to investigate, and rumors about the Fry arrest spread across the Negro belt. This is Walter McGraw.
You have heard another in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Stan Brooks describes the police version of the arrest that triggered the riots.
What makes a quiet community explode? How can a seemingly routine drunk driving arrest touch off the kind of bloody rioting that racked Los Angeles? There are many reasons. Together, they tell the story. There was the heat. 95 was the high on that fateful Wednesday, and Watts was steaming. There was the frustration. The federal poverty program was bogged down in political bickering, and the poor people of the slums saw their dreams crumble. There was the smoldering hatred of the police, justified or not. And as day turned into night, there was the arrest of a Negro, Marquette Fry, for drunk driving. It happens every day, an arrest like this, but on August 11th, it triggered a bloodbath. Fry himself blames the California Highway Patrol for antagonizing the crowd by making nasty remarks and brandishing a shotgun. There is still some confusion over just what happened, but the rumors that spread through the slums that night gave only one side. They told me the police had been giving the boy a ticket, and when the boy drew back, they jumped him, is the way one Negro heard it. They told me the boy's mother came there then, and that she was pregnant. And he goes on, the police hit or kicked her anyway. And then he adds the telling words. That's what they told me. I don't know if it was true. On that night in Los Angeles, in that climate of hate and hopelessness, it didn't really matter whether it were true or not. The festering frustration needed an outlet, and this was it. And so the people, fired up by the rumors, rioted. A white police officer in Watts told me,
I know if I was a Negro and I heard all my life that the worst enemy I have is a police officer, and I'm standing on a street corner. The heat is 95. I've been sweating all day, and somebody runs up to me and says, there's a police officer around the corner killing a colored woman with a baby. I would tend to be excited. These are one of the minor rumors that is floating around.
And a Negro in Watts told me the same thing.
I heard conflicting stories that a man was handcuffed and the woman was handcuffed behind her back and they put her up on top of cars.
Rumors and riots, a classic pattern, as Alex Rosen, Dean of the School of Social Work at New York University, explains.
Sociological study of previous racial riots reveals that it often begins with a stimulus, often of a trivial nature. A crowd gathers and rumors fly. The crowd mills about the mutual stimulation. There is a communication of excitement. And then mob anonymity seems to absolve the individual from responsibility for destructive acts. And brutal emotions then arise, which are given sanction by the very existence of the mob. The riots in Watts substantially followed this pattern.
A hot night in August, a routine arrest, rumors and resentment. All these the preface to a riot. This is Stan Brooks.
You have heard another in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Dr. Bergen Evans, professor of English at Northwestern University, discusses the meaning of the word hoodlum.
The violence in Los Angeles, Chicago, Springfield, New York, and almost everywhere else that it occurs is certain to be attributed to hoodlums and teenagers. No one exactly knows why young rowdies are called hoodlums, except as a general extension of the name of some youthful gangsters in San Francisco in the 1870s. But why they were called hoodlums is uncertain. Some think it was a twisting of the Irish Muldoon. Others, with better justification, think it's the Bavarian dialect word hodulum, which means exactly what hoodlum means. For the Bavarians had them too, and 100 years ago, and every city has had them. The astonishing thing about modern city life is not how dangerous it is, but comparatively how safe it is. We forget that up to 150 years ago, a woman never went out alone, never at night certainly, and rarely by day, and that men went out at night only in groups and armed. In the late 17th and early 18th century, London was terrorized by ruffians, variously called Muns, Scourers, Hectors, Knickers, Hochabites, and Mohawks. There was no modern police to restrain them, and they were dangerous indeed. And they had their riots. The Gordon riot in London in 1780 did far more damage than any of our so-called race riots have yet done. Most rioters and looters, by the way, have always been young people, people with lots of undirected energy and no stake in the established order. An elderly man goes to bed at night. He doesn't go out and loot. Something throws a spark into an explosive social situation, and a great deal of pent-up resentment finds release. The Romans bought them off with bread and circuses. The Middle Ages usually had a plague in time to prevent things getting too bad. If there wasn't a plague at hand, there was always a crusade or a war. Henry VIII tried to exterminate them by hanging. It's been estimated that some 60,000 of his subjects were hanged during his reign, and almost all young men, what we would call teenagers. But it didn't seem to do any good, for there were just as many in the next reign. The 18th century had the press gang. The 19th century had cotton mills in India. But none of it, as we say, worked. Young men kept on being born, and those that were restless and frustrated and idle got into trouble. The word hoodlum doesn't bother me as much as the more common teenager. That's an expression that annoys me. It's vastly vague. There's all the difference in life between 13 and 19, and it's offensively patronizing. It assumes, in the spirit of Booth Tarkington's Penrod, that young people are cute or amusing or absurd or dangerous. They're usually called hoodlums or punks if they're dangerous, teenagers when they're being condescended to. Whereas they are simply human beings, young human beings, each one an individual, troubled, desperate, tortured by pressures they don't understand, resentful of authority, and at the same time frightened of it. What to do about their problems, I don't know. Social order, of course, must be maintained, and by force if necessary. But we won't begin to solve these problems until we accept people as people, black or white, young or old.
You've just heard Dr. Bergen Evans in another chapter in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation. Group W reporter Walter McGraw investigates some of the reasons for the riots.
What caused the riots in Los Angeles? Many are the answers given.
They don't think it was the Negro person doing it. They think it was mobs brought in from the eastern states to start the riots with the colored people.
Well, I'd say that these riots were very similar to riots which broke out in Rochester, New York, in Philadelphia, Harlem, and several other cities. Obviously, it was caused by some national organization.
I believe communists behind the whole thing.
What caused the riots? One school of thought blames outside organizations, though there is little agreement on the political coloration of the alleged organizing forces or on the amount of participation of any one of the groups. For instance, Urban League Director Wesley R. Brazier says,
I would think that the Afro-Nationalists, which has its headquarters in New York, had something to do with it. I think that the black Muslims had some role to play in this. I can recall listening to Muhammad at a meeting in which he stated he could have stopped it immediately, merely by making a couple of phone calls.
Well, I think the Muslims had their little fingers in it at certain levels toward the tail end. They, like the communists, always come in at the 9th hour and, But I think the people to watch are gangs. And if you're probing sociologically, you may want to dig at this point. The gangs who cooperated to keep the thing going are gangs that ordinarily fight each other in the street.
Writer Louis Lomax, as you've just heard, gives less importance to the influence of communists than does Mayor Sam Yorty, who says they, at the very least, set up the atmosphere for the riots. While Police Chief William Parker does not disagree with Yorty, he does add this.
Communist agitation, I think, is always present wherever there's trouble. They move in on all of these things and capitalize on them, but frankly, as much as I am an anti-communist, and notoriously so, I'm more concerned about the behavior of the American people, because I think if the American people are led into these situations, regardless of who the agitators are, that the responsibility will lie with the people themselves.
While few of us would disagree that in a democracy, the final responsibility for any political action rests with the people, it's this tendency to oversimplify that perhaps makes Chief Parker most vulnerable to the critics who demand his ouster. Harder, more detailed reasons for the riot are needed. These will be explored in the next few segments of this report on A Profile of a Riot.
You have heard another in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network. Since the riots in Los Angeles in the summer of 1965, a team of reporters and sociologists have been probing beneath the surface to find out what really happened, why, and what to do in order to prevent similar outbreaks in other parts of the nation.
I saw a man pick up a 5-seat sofa and put it on his head and took it home and came back and got the matching chair.
That was writer Louis Lomax, an interested observer of the Los Angeles riots, and this is Walter McGraw. Many are the reasons advanced for the riots: outside influences, police brutality, and perhaps most often, lack of communication between the citizens of what is now simply called Watts and the rest of Los Angeles. Louis Lomax says the looting, the bloodshed, and most of all, the burning was an attempt to communicate.
You got an expression from people who, for whatever reasons, have no stakes in this society. This was the genius of the phrase, burn, baby, burn. What that phrase really means is, it didn't belong to my daddy, it doesn't belong to me, it won't belong to my children, so burn the damn thing down. You can't have it either. They are also people who are convinced that this society offers them no honest way out. I think it's in the third book of the Republic that Plato says that poverty consists not so much in the absence of goods, but in the overabundance of desire.
The other side of this same coin comes from the official point of view as expressed by one police spokesman.
People were going in and out of the stores, carrying things out, and at this time there were children and young adults and middle-aged people, and they were amazed that they were put under arrest. I cannot help but think, personally, that the civil rights demonstrations made the lax attitude with regard to crime. In other words, I frankly think that there has been an effective program of pointing out to the Negro that he has been discriminated against, that he has had problems, and somebody along the line has sold a job to some of these people that because they had been deprived, that they had the right to riot, that they had the right to loot, and they had the right to burn.
Communication or just plain lawlessness? Here is Dean Alex Rosen of the New York University School of Social Work.
Among the several tragedies of the Watts community in Los Angeles is that the civil rights organizations did not reach the masses of Negroes. Had they done so, the Negro community would have been able to express their feelings in more benign, more acceptable ways in street demonstrations, marches on City Hall, and so on. It was the very absence of such safety valves that made the explosion inevitable.
More about the causes of riots on Profile of a Riot Yet to Come. This is Walter McGraw.
You have heard another in a series of reports produced by the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the New York University School of Social Work. A special hour-long documentary, Los Angeles Profile of a Riot, will be broadcast by this and other member stations of the National Educational Radio Network.